So, Davey and I don't prepare talks ahead of time. In fact, sometimes we hardly know the subject that we're going to talk about before we start. But on the other hand, well, there's a joke about a mechanic, and man drives his car in, and there's some little thing wrong, and the mechanic looks in and he adjusts a couple of wires and fixes a little part. Takes him about 5 minutes, and then he gives the man a bill for $50. And the guy says, $50 for 5 minutes? He said, well, 5 minutes of work and 50 years of training to do the 5 minutes of work. So there's a lot of experience. Every sincere devotee has worked on this question of how to deepen their spiritual life. It's basically the question for the devotee to work on for however long he's on this planet. Because if we aren't working to deepen our spiritual life and continually working at that, Master said, you either go forward or you go backward. You don't just plateau. And so either you're continually working to deepen your spiritual life, or you're going to be drifting backward. And so for the sincere devotee, the desire to move forward, the desire to finally achieve the goal of what all spiritual practice is about, which is union with God, that desire keeps propelling us forward, and we keep working and experimenting, and some things seem to be really helpful, some things seem to be not so helpful. But one advantage of having a community and living in a community the way that we have, so Devi and I have been at Ananda since the very beginning, so in community since the spring of 1969. And so whatever that is, like 42 years now. The advantage of that is that you have not only your personal experience to go by, but you have the observation of a living laboratory of hundreds, by this time thousands of people. And so you can begin to see patterns of what works and what doesn't work. And so I'll talk about some of those patterns, and Devi will talk about some, and then we'll have questions and answers. But there are two aspects of the spiritual practices that we do. Well, to back up, Master said that his path was a combination of meditation and service. And what that, it's a kind of a catchy way of collecting the seed thought that meditation, which is, and I won't talk very much about this because we all meditate, and I'll talk about it peripherally, but not what meditation is. But our path of meditation with Kriya Yoga is essentially focused on the withdrawing of energy from going out through the senses especially, but out, so that the world outside of us not only seems very real, but is hypnotically involving. And so we get strung out. Our happiness depends on outward things, the way people behave, the way others behave, the way the economy behaves, the way the world behaves, whether the people in Occupy Wall Street are being treated properly or not, and it's way, way outside of ourselves. And so that tendency to have our energy and attention outside of ourselves really is one of the key things that keeps us from finding God. Because even though God exists outside of ourselves, where we're going to find him is not outside of ourselves. It's going to be inside. The other thing is that Master said that all happiness and unhappiness is inside your own self. And so the reason that the world is so hypnotically involving is this seed thought. And it's not like you and I have created it individually. It's the mass delusion by which God keeps creation going. But the core of that mass delusion is that if conditions are right, then I can be happy. And so most of activity is constant working to create outward conditions that are right so that I can be happy. And so one of the key things on the spiritual path is to turn that around and really realize for ourselves what Master said, which is your happiness and unhappiness does not, and I'll repeat this, does not depend on conditions outside of yourself. You can be in virtual hell and still be able to control the potentially. You can control your happiness or unhappiness, but you can't do it with the energy streaming outside. And so one key to the meditative practice is to reverse that flow of energy. And so all of our techniques, we started out this morning with energization and then with meditation. But the energization exercises which Master gave us, and he said were his unique contribution to the science of yoga, the exercises themselves are not very important. It's the control of the energy, of sending that energy to the particular muscles and withdrawing it. It's that learning that control that's important. And we go through virtually every muscle in the body when we do it. So it isn't the muscle that's important. It isn't the region of the body that's important. It's the sending and withdrawing of energy that's important. Why is that important? Because all the great masters are trying to help us break that, one could say, fundamental matrix of the delusive force of Maya, which is to draw our energy, our attention, and our sense of control outside of ourselves. So control the energy as we learn in energization and bring it in, and the inside world begins to become much more real and much more available for us to work with. And so that inward drawing of energy, and then the other movement is to bring the energy from the lower chakras to the higher chakras, and especially to the point between the eyebrow, which for all practical purposes, this point is where enlightenment is going to take place. And so if we think of the body as an electrical system, there are two primary polarities. There's, one could say, that the inner spine, our inner spine, and the outer world. Inner spine represents the positive pole, the outer world represents the negative pole. And like a battery, as long as those two poles are connected and there's energy flowing between them, then you put a light bulb in that wire and the light bulb gets lit up. Well, that light bulb is Maya. And as long as the energy is flowing between those two polarities, that light bulb of Maya gets lit up and we're dazzled by it. And so the first polarity is to shut off the negative pole of the outward flowing energy. The second polarity is to bring that energy to the spiritual eye. And so The inner polarity in the spine is between the base of the spine with the Sushumna and the spiritual eye. It's actually the top of the head, the 1,000-petal lotus. But Master said that first all that energy has to come up to the spiritual eye, and then another subtle channel opens up for the 1,000-petal lotus. And so by bringing it here, we come to Christ consciousness. This is the center of Christ consciousness. When all the energy is brought, the Kundalini is brought up to this point, that polarity no longer exists. And so we achieve the state of unity at that point with everything in existence. Then we have to first achieve that. That's why Jesus says in the Bible, "No one cometh unto the Father but by me." Now, how vastly that has been misinterpreted in all the football games where you see people holding up signs. What it means is we have to first achieve Christ consciousness at this point, and then we cometh unto the Father after that. So we first achieve unity with everything in creation, but then there's another step where we have to achieve unity with God beyond creation, because He's both beyond and in creation. At any rate, I don't want to go into a lot of this. It gets a little bit esoteric. But the point here being that it's very, very important that we work on our meditative practice. And so the essence of meditation, Master said, meditation is deep concentration on God or on one of the aspects of God. Now, we think of concentration as being like a mental process. We have to concentrate our thoughts. But here's what I've been talking about is a whole other kind of way of seeing, a whole other paradigm of concentration. It's the concentration of life force, not just of mental thoughts. And so the concentration of life force is first drawing it in and then drawing it up, and when it becomes entirely concentrated here, it's concentrated on God, or as we perceive that in the spiritual eye, because Christ consciousness, remember, is the unity of consciousness with the entire creation. And so the unity in Christ consciousness is also a unity with the aspects of God by which He manifests creation. So light and sound and power and wisdom and love and joy and peace and calmness, those various aspects of God, that's deep concentration. So the life force becomes concentrated and united to those aspects of God. So in meditation, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to concentrate the energy at the point between the eyebrows, and inward and upward, always inward and upward. And as long, I don't know if that's open, as long as we keep attempting to do that, that's the effort that we need to make in meditation. Master gave us specific techniques for that. Most important of all is Kriya Yoga. And so the Kriya is the technique par excellence to achieve that. So in meditation is one aspect of our spiritual path. And I'm not going to talk more about it because we talk so much about meditative practices. But I wanted to talk about it kind of in this sort of fundamental way, so we can go on to see what it means to really try to deepen our spiritual life. So one part of deepening our spiritual life is to keep working on getting our meditation deeper and deeper. Master said we should try to have every meditation deeper than the one before. Now, obviously, I mean, we've been on the path for 42 years or 45 years or whatever it is.
For
and
6 months.
or 6 months, or it doesn't matter, but you've had a lot of meditations. And let me hazard a guess that every meditation has not been deeper than the one before. I'm just guessing. But
Told you.
yeah. But what if you forget whether you've succeeded or not? But what if you hold on to that seed thought that what you're trying to do is have this meditation deeper than the one before? I have a nephew named Mike. I'm going to give you this could have changed. This is the Mikey principle that I'm going to reveal now. If the great leaders of the world had known the Mikey principle, we would live in a very, very different world. We could be speaking French if Napoleon had known it, German if Hitler had known it, I don't know, Greek if Alexander had known it. Anyway, here's the Mikey principle. Davy and I were visiting my brother, and Mike is his son, and Mikey was 6 at the time, maybe 5, I don't know. We were all sitting around the kitchen table, just talking. There were about 5 or 6, 7 adults, and then Mikey was sitting at the end of the table, and he had blocks, children's blocks, and he was piling them up on top of each other. And he was just playing, and we were talking. And then we noticed that the stack was getting higher and higher. So every block in that stack was higher than the one before it. So it's like meditation. So he was stacking them up, and every one was higher. Every one was better than the one before. And so as it got higher and higher, the conversation stopped because we were looking at Mikey, and he put one on, and that thing swayed back and forth like this. And finally it leveled out and got centered and still, and he picked up another block. And every adult at that table knew that was it. He put that block on, that was it. It collapsed. And he went, ta-da! And that is the Mikey principle. Well, so we attempt to stack these blocks up or have every meditate. Well, it's going to collapse at some point. Maybe it collapses virtually every meditation. So today's meditation was not as good as yesterday's meditation, and it collapsed. But the attempt to keep building on it makes it directional. So if when we sit to meditate, we really think, I'm going to make a real attempt here to make this meditation deeper than the last one I had. If we can just have that direction clear, rather than kind of vague and drifty, but that direction clear, that alone will help us deepen our spiritual life. And so, meditation, there are 2 aspects, Master said. There's quantity and there's quality. And so the quality of meditation is much more important than the quantity of meditation. If you could really have a 15-minute meditation that continually was deeper and deeper and deeper, you don't have to worry about quantity. For one thing, you'll get deep enough so meditation will become so attractive that you will naturally want to do more of it. Master would go to a movie, and when we go to a movie, at least for me, the tendency that I have is not to meditate while the movie's going. Because I'm still at the level where the movie is more attractive than the meditation. It was opposite with Master. He would go to the movie. Movie basically represented a place where nobody pestered him. And so he could go there and meditate, and he said he loved the show. But he was watching the inner show, not the outer show. And so quantity, as meditation begins to take deeper and deeper aspects, the quantity will begin to take care of itself. Now, we can't just assume that. You can't just kind of, I don't know, flop down and slump over and say, oh, that's, Jyotish said the quantity is going to take care of itself. I'll just lay back here. That it's not that. It's that you don't have to keep straining and straining and straining. But at first you do. And so I want to talk about what are some of the key things to increasing the quantity of meditation. As I said, the quality of our meditation is much more important. And so don't increase quantity simply by decreasing quality. And it's easy to do that, you know. You figure, well, I've got an hour and a half here. I can really kind of puzzle out my schedule for the next week. Or maybe I could work on it for a month and let me think about my stock portfolio. And so you end up, you fill up an hour and a half, you're sitting there. Might look good to the outsiders, but have you been meditating? No. So quality is much more important. So don't fill up quantity at the expense of quality. But assuming that you can hold quality, how do you lengthen, increase the amount of quality meditation that you do? The first and most important part is regularity. Without regularity, you won't really advance in either quality or quantity. Because regularity allows you to do it. If you're not regular, if you don't have set periods when you're going to meditate, then if every time you come to the point of should I meditate or not, and that becomes the question because you don't have the habitual pattern set, oh, let me balance here. Meditate, not meditate. Cup of coffee and the news or meditate. Well, today I'm going to choose meditation. But tomorrow you're going to choose whatever the alternative is. So you've got to have those set patterns where we function by habituality. Our language skills are habitual. Our movements are habitual. Our breathing patterns are habitual. We're creatures of habit. And so here we want to, just as we want to learn to control the life force, we want to learn to control and direct the life force in terms of creating strong habitual patterns. What this really comes down to is primarily 2 set times a day when you meditate. Certainly one. For almost everyone, that is the morning meditation. Because for most people, our mornings are more under our control in time-wise than our evenings. And our energy typically is stronger in the morning than it is at night. But so for most people, what this really comes down to is you set a morning time that you meditate and you don't allow circumstances to break you out of that. You know, here the ashram has 6 meditations a week at a set time in the morning. That is the perfect fundamental basis for a life that becomes powerfully focused around meditation. And then the evening meditation, some people, that's the best meditation time for them, if it is for you. But have one of those be usually a longer period than the other, where you have real energy into it. Obviously, both of them should be energetic and important. If I can tell you from personal experience, if you begin a pattern like this, after a period of time, that habitual pattern will become very, very powerful, and it will aid you in what you're trying to do. I probably had, I had Kriya in 1960. My first Kriya was in December of 1967, so that's coming up on this December will be 44 years. I probably have not missed meditation in all of that time, at least once a day. I doubt that I've missed meditation a dozen times in all of that time. Not often, I mean many times that wasn't very good meditation or very long meditation, but at least I did it. For some period of years, my evening meditation, my night meditation, was less steady than that. Sometimes I'd be tired and I would go to bed without meditating. I would say maybe about 20 or 25 years ago, I made the decision that I would never go to sleep at night until I had meditated and, for me, done at least 36 Kriyas. So I set that as the bottom line. And it took some will to do that, to break the old pattern of irregularity. It wasn't large irregularity, but I'd miss it once in a while. It took some time before that pattern got completely set. But once these patterns get set, then it's as if there's a universal force that helps you. There have been a number of times where, say, I've been reading in bed or something like that and have not yet meditated, and I fall asleep. And sometimes I will wake up like at midnight and, whoa, I've got to get my meditation in, because there's like the support of the universe gets behind you in that consciousness. So if you're going to increase the quantity of your meditation, start by making sure, absolutely sure, that you have regularity in your meditations. And for each of us, that works out in a slightly different way. So you're going to have to work that out for yourself. But that's the basis of it. That's like the foundation. On top of that foundation of regularity, you can begin to construct the house of, here I've talked already about quality, so now I'm talking quantity. You can begin to construct the house of more hours of meditation. And I would not recommend that you simply try to increase too quickly. For runners, there's a kind of rule of thumb that you never increase your mileage more than 10% at a time. So if you have been running for a mile, you don't all of a sudden try to run 5 miles. You run a mile and a tenth, and then gradually you build up. It doesn't take too long, but those incremental increases allow you to build up according to your capacity. If you outrun your capacity in running, you can get injured because there's physical stress. You don't get injured in meditation, but you get psychologically over your limit, and you kind of collapse, and then meditation becomes unattractive. Master said the strongest arrow in the delusion, in the quiver of delusion, is the arrow of lack of desire to meditate. And so one of the ways that delusion can draw you into it is to get you to push too far, too fast, and you kind of collapse, and then you don't want to meditate at all. So don't build too quickly. That's why when we first initiate people into Kriya, we tell them only to increase gradually. In part, they also have to build up their capacity. So increasing in gradual terms your kind of basic meditation I'm talking about, let's call it the amount of time you spend in your morning meditation. And so build up to kind of the capacity that is there for your life. Here we meditate, and at the village we meditate for an hour and a half for that morning meditation. And it's not hard to build up to that capacity. Again, remember, don't build up at the expense of quality. It's better to meditate for 45 minutes with real intense concentration than it is to sit there for an hour and a half and habitually space out. So but do try to build up so that you're really almost none of us are going to stay completely concentrated for an hour and a half unless you have really achieved the ability to control your life force and focus it. You can't stay concentrated because concentration depends on that life force. So yes, we're going to space out. But in longer meditations, what you find is rhythms that go up and down, so that there's a depth of meditation and then you kind of drift off of that. But if you don't quit when you've drifted off, but then you make another effort, you will find that you actually go deeper for a period of time, and that continues it that way. So don't expect just straight total concentration progress. Just keep at it, but keep at it sincerely. So as long as you have a strong will force to continue to deepen your meditation, and then you add the number of hours with it, then you'll be able to do that. So I've mainly been talking about meditation here. I'm going to end just very briefly talking about what you do with the rest of the time outside of meditation. Partly, Master said meditation and service. So we should see our activity as service. But there again, it's not easy just to stay aware enough so that we're seeing our activity. As we get caught up into the activity itself, and it can be hours before we ever have a spiritual thought when we're caught up in activity. One of the ways of countering that is to train yourself to fill in the kind of the time when your engine is idling. You know, when you're not concentrated, you're not caught up in your work, you're just standing in line, or you're sitting at your desk waiting for a phone call, or whatever it is. Everybody has lots of idle moments in their life. For most people, they begin to daydream during those periods. So you just kind of space off, you're kind of your mind is drifting. Well, instead of letting the mind drift, try to fill those idle periods with the thought of God. This was almost the total teaching of Anandamayi Ma, the great saint. And she would say, take a chant and continually chant that chant, or take an image of God and try to visualize that image. So fill in those idle periods with the continual reminders of God and your spiritual life and your... everybody's a little bit different, but I try to fill in a lot of those idle moments for myself with a deepening, intensity of effort for attunement with Master. I would say that that's my primary, outside of meditation, that's my primary spiritual practice, is attempting to get deeper with Master. So I try to feel that He's with me when I'm walking or running or standing in line. Or last year, during our winter renewal week, I suggested to the community that we all learn the poem God, God, God and repeat that. And so I often will repeat that many, many times a day, trying to think of the essence behind the words, but also that it came from Master. That was a suggestion that Master had. So it isn't just an idle thing. It's a practical way of trying to keep that ever-deepening attunement going. And so I'll keep trying to remember that. Or the other practice that I do personally is I will take one chant for a period of time, and I'll work on that chant, and I'll chant it over and over again. And that might be, a couple of days I do it. It might be a couple of months that I'm inwardly, mainly working on one chant. Master said that he took all of the chants and he took them into samadhi and thereby spiritualized them. And so what I'm trying to do in that practice is to focus on one chant at a time and go really, really deep with it, so that there's some sort of super conscious connection. I try to the best of my ability, both through repetition and intensity, to bring that chant into a kind of super conscious state. And then it has a deeper resonance with you. And just like if you commit to regularity of meditation, you'll be drawn out of sleep in order to meditate. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and that chant will be going in my mind. And I don't have to, I'm supposed to chant that chant. It'll just be going, but it's because, there's been the outward effort to kind of prime the pump enough so that it takes on a life of its own. But all of us, I'll just end with this because Davey's going to talk and then we'll have some time for questions. But all of us are going to have to find ways that we keep turning our hearts and our minds toward God continually. And we have to find it in the depth of meditation, and we have to find it in the periods of daily living. I haven't even touched on our interactions with other people. Davey may or may not touch on that, I don't know. But I've been talking more about our own interior practices here. But our interactions with other people, we have to constantly, if we're going to deepen our spiritual life, we have to keep turning our hearts and minds toward God or toward Master. And we have to do that quantitatively, more and more intensively, and with intensity, and we have to do it quantitatively, so that more and more hours of a week are spent in meditation, or more times in a day our mind is turned toward God, or repetition of a chant or a mantra or whatever it is, but both qualitatively and quantitatively we have to turn, as Jesus said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On these two hang all the law and the commandments. And that's what we have to do. We have to keep turning our love toward God or toward Master with our devotion, our mind, our soul. Our strength means our willpower. All of those come together. And if we keep making that effort and live in good, connect with others who are doing it, is a great help, then inevitably we will make progress and deepen our spiritual life.